Shalom. Shalom. First thing and foremost, I'm going to give all praise, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Bahashim, Kakadash. Double honors to the elders, double honors to the apostles of Great Millstone for teaching this truth according to the Bible. In today's video, we're going to go ahead and review, and we're going to remember exactly how brutal slavery was for much of the Israelites, especially you southern tribes. We're going to review and go over once again how brutal the slavery was for much of the Israelites. And even though the prominent um, trading back and forth of slaves was the southern tribes of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, you also had northern tribes that were being sold and shipped across the Atlantic Ocean, in the transatlantic slave trade. So it affected the entire nation. Now, this individual here, I believe he's a rap artist. I'm not sure of his name, but he goes into the breeding plantations, in all the movies, he'll mention it as well. In all these movies, all right, about slavery and early colonial America, you always see the prominent cotton slave plantations, the tobacco plantations, even the sugar cane. You'll see a lot of brutality going on in movies like Uncle Tom or Uncle Tom's Cabin. Okay. Um, and but there is he makes a good point that those were not even the most prominent plantations. Especially after the transatlantic slave trade ended and slavery continued. The most prominent slave plantation, was the breeding plantations, where slaves were forcibly bred to continue the numbers, the supply, of slaves that could be sold in America. All right, this won't be a long video, but I do have a few scriptures, so I'm going to try to get through everything. So let's listen to this one time straight through, and then I'll listen to it again, and we'll pull the scriptures on the second time around.
Album called The Middle Passage. They've shown us every plantation with cotton on it. You know what plantation they've never shown us, Abby? The most prominent ones. The ones that were most profitable. The breeding plantations. Why don't you want to show us those? You know why? Because after the research that I did for this album, you realize that the moment that a girl menstruated, she was put in a stable where a horse would be and forcibly mated, forcibly raped by a male of the slave master's choice. And when she had children, they weren't called children, they were called a litter of pups. The punishment for raping or killing a person in medieval Spain is gelding. Gelding is when you take hot pincers and you take a man's balls and dick off root and stem. Killing a person, law of the Bible, right? Medieval Spain, super religious. You killed a man, he should be killed. Why were indigenous and black people categorized as subhuman? So under the law, you would not be punished for the things that you did to us. That's why. You used to be proud, right? Used to be proud, white America, of rape and murder. Used to be proud of colonization. Used to, wow, that made us tough. And then you got ashamed of it. And that's what you're dealing with. That's what America's dealing with, a schizophrenic crisis. There's a British manual, right, that was taken out of the British Museum because within the manual, it talked about how rape was a weapon of war that should be used against the indigenous population. You're ashamed of that now. You're ashamed, right? Who was Christopher Columbus? His image has been so whitewashed, but he was trafficking little girls on an island. Who does that sound like, huh? All you right-wing defenders of Christopher Columbus and his legacy, he was trafficking 9-year-old indigenous girls on an island. Who does that remind you of, you intellectual coward? Just because liberals are dog shit doesn't mean that you shake hands with the devil.
All right, so this brings me to my first point. All right, let's go back to what I typed in Google here. All right, and the question I asked was, What was the Middle Passage? Because that's what he said that his album was going to be called. Okay, the AI overview says the Middle Passage was a brutal, forced journey of enslaved Africans. Now we know that they were Israelites, not Africans. They're not Hamites, Israelites. Okay, of the tribe of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi primarily. Okay, so-called Negroes. Okay, so of enslaved Israelites across the Atlantic Ocean from West Africa to the Americas. Okay, this is also known as the transatlantic slave trade. It says the deadly second leg of the triangle trade, characterized by horrific, inhumane conditions where millions died from disease, starvation, and violence, forming the foundation of American slavery. And American slavery was the foundation of the American economy and industrial boom, what gave America its economic start. Okay. So, yes, it is actually true and factual that America was built on the backs of slaves, which were the Israelites, and on top of stolen land where they had shed innocent blood. Okay, so this is triple defiled. All right. It says ships packed captives like cargo with little air, food, or sanitation, leading to high mortality rates and immense suffering for roughly 10 to 12 million people forcibly transported over centuries. And it is far, far more than 10 to 12 million people. You see, Esau likes to play with the numbers. Okay. Esau is never going to tell you exactly how many people that he trafficked. All right. But 10 to 12 million over hundreds of years, 400 years. No, that's nothing. Okay. That might have been 100 years worth of people. Okay. Like, let's multiply that number of 12 million times four, and you might be a little bit closer. All right. But right in here in the middle of this paragraph, what did it say? Ships packed captives like cargo. And you know where we're going to go. All right. That first scripture we always go to, Deuteronomy 28 and 68, probably the one scripture, if you could attribute most of the Israelites who know that they're Israelites today, most of the Israelites who have woken up, Deuteronomy 28 and 68, especially with Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, Deuteronomy 28 and 68 is probably responsible for the majority of Israelites coming to the realization of who they are when they read this scripture. All right. Because of what I just read with the transatlantic slave trade, the Middle Passage, this is exactly what this verse is talking about. It says, "And the Lord Yahweh shall bring thee into Egypt again." Egypt, not meaning the actual land of Egypt, but Egypt meaning house of bondage or slavery. It says, with ships. That's talking about cargo slave ships. By the way whereof I spake unto thee, thou shalt see it no more again. And there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, a slave man and slave woman, and no man shall buy you. Okay? One of the most foundational scriptures as a Hebrew Israelite, even, um, even with all the different camps, all right? This is probably the first scripture, okay? When you hear the Hebrew Israelites, and if you're going to come to the realization of who you are, this is probably one of the first scriptures, if not the first scripture that will kind of break that that hard shell, that scaling off of your eyes, okay, that's been put over us for centuries. Okay? Now let's go back to what this guy said.
I'm writing an album called The Middle Passage. They've shown us every plantation with cotton on it. You know what plantation they've never shown us, Abby? The most prominent ones. The ones that were most profitable. The breeding plantations. Why don't you want to show us those? You know why? Because after the research that I did for this album, you realize that the moment that a girl menstruated, she was put in a stable where a horse would be and forcibly mated.
And this is true. This was the most prominent um, plantations were breeding plantations. Okay? Let's get Deuteronomy 28 and 32. It says, thy sons and thy daughters shall be given unto other people, and thine eyes shall look and fail with longing for them all the day long, and there shall be no might in thine hand, meaning you're not going to have power to have control over your children. You're not going to have power to stop them from being sold into slavery, or it's from being trafficked, or from being forcibly bred. Okay. As an Israelite man, you have no power here in Babylon the Great over your own children, and you never have. Okay. Even today, the Israelite man has no power over his own seed. Okay. Especially with the wicked, demonic, anti-Hamashiach justice system and law and courts that you deal with today, to this very day. And it's always been like that. This curse, this is one of the curses, just showing you, okay, who you are as an Israelite. Okay. Isaiah 47:6. I was wroth with my people, I have polluted mine inheritance and given them into thine hand. Thou didst show them no mercy upon the ancient, has it says, upon the ancient hast thou verily heavily laid thy yoke, and all the torturous things that was done to Jake in slavery. All right, that's Esau Edom. Okay, this scripture is specifically talking about Babylon the Great. It's talking about the daughter of the Chaldees. I believe if I go back, okay, right here, Isaiah 47:5, it says, sit thou silent, and get thee into darkness, O daughter of the Chaldeans. That's the daughter of Babylon. That's talking about Babylon the Great, which is America. Okay. For thou shalt no more be called the Lady of Kingdoms. And that's what America is known as. Okay. It says, I was wroth with my people and have polluted mine inheritance and given them into thine hand. So the daughter of the Chaldees, or Babylon the Great, in the latter days was prophesied to have the Israelites in their hand as slaves. Okay, so it's making more sense now. Now I typed in another question in Google. I said, how prominent were the breeding slave plantations during American slavery? AI Overview says the practice of forced reproduction, often referred to as slave breeding by historians and enslavers, was a widespread and systematic component of American slavery, becoming particularly prominent and economically vital after the end of the Atlantic slave trade in 1808. Okay, so let's go over to some of the things that the reasons why they had these breeding plantations so prominent. It says economic incentive after 1808, a ban on importing enslaved people from Africa, the land of Ham. The domestic enslaved population became the sole source of labor growth. This created a powerful economic incentive for enslavers to encourage the forced reproduction. Enslaved children were essentially human savings accounts, and they were currency. Human beings are currency. Okay, these are the money. Okay, the resources of, okay, the rich elite Edomites that were slaving these people. Okay, the Edomites in general. And this is why even in the plantations you have today, you have a department called HR. Okay, human resources. Okay, we were literally considered savings accounts. So when you had a woman, okay, a slave woman that was producing children, and a man that could produce children, okay, that's literally money, okay, to the slave master. Because each human, each slave, each Israelite born could be sold for money. They were property. It says used as the basis of the money, as of money and credit. Systemic coercion. The practice went beyond occasional sexual violence. Enslavers implemented a system of reproductive regimentation, interfering with marriages, encouraging pregnancies, and rewarding high fertility with minor conse- uh, concessions like extra food or fewer working hours while pregnant. Okay, so this is what they would do to the slaves, right? They would take a woman that was already married, and it would forcibly breed her with another man. That's adultery. So that's enforced slavery. Okay, breeding farms. While farms were solely bred While farms that solely bred enslaved people were rare, nearly all major plantations engaged in the practice to some degree. And this is completely false. There's the breeding plantations were a major business, okay, in the South, especially in the South. Some areas, notably parts of Virginia, Maryland, became centers of supplying enslaved people to expanding cotton and sugar plantations in the deep South, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Alabama. And that's where you get the history of this from. Okay. Okay. So they would take big, strong Jakes. Okay. This is why, if you look at Jake, a lot of Jake nowadays, okay, especially when you look at the athletes, we tend to be a little bit taller, a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger, a little bit faster. That was actually a part of the aspect of breeding, okay, selective breeding between big strong slave men and healthy young slave women, and forcibly breeding them. Okay, so you produce a lot of healthy, strong males, okay, and that seed line, that bloodline continues on, okay, even to this very day. Let's get Joel 3:3. It says, "And they have cast lots for my people, and have given a boy for an harlot, and sold a girl for wine, that they might drink." Okay, like I said, these children, okay, that were produced, they were literally human savings accounts. They were currency, they were money. And the slave masters could sell them for anything. They could give a boy for a harlot, okay? They could sell a girl and get wine or other resources, tobacco, sugar. You could sell these enslaved Israelites for all sorts of different things. All right. Ezekiel 16:37. "Behold, therefore, I will gather all thy lovers." Okay. This is the punishment, okay, that we had to endure because of this. It says, "I will gather all thy lovers with whom thou hast taken pleasure, and all them that thou hast loved," the Israelites going off, committing idolatry and following the ways of the heathen and the other nations, trying to cleave on to the other nations. Okay. "With all them that thou hast hated, I will even gather them round about against thee, and will discover thy nakedness unto them, and they may see all thy nakedness," meaning we're going to be completely stripped and embarrassed and put into a low estate in front of all the other nations. And the slavery that we went through was a major part of that. Okay, let's get back to this video. Let's go.
I'm writing an album called The Middle Passage in a stable where a horse would be, and forcibly mated, forcibly raped by a male of the slave master's choice. And when she had children, they weren't called children, they were called a litter of pups. The punishment for raping or killing a person in medieval Spain is gelding. Gelding is when you take hot pincers and you take a man's balls and dick off root and stem. Killing a person, law of the Bible, right? Medieval Spain, super religious. You killed a man, he should be killed. Why were indigenous and black people categorized as subhuman? So under the law, you would not be punished for the things that you did to us. That's why. You used to be proud, right? Used to be proud, white America, of rape and murder. Used to be proud of colonization. Used to, wow, that made us tough. And then you got ashamed of it. And that's what you're dealing with. That's what America's dealing with, a schizophrenic crisis. There's a British manual.
Yeah, they used to brag about that. They used to be proud about, slavery and dominating and conquering and colonizing. And now, they're ashamed of it. Okay, like Elder Malcolm goes into all the time, a shameful spewing upon their glory. Okay, they used to glorify in it. Okay, and now it's a shame to them. Okay, scripture that says, it's on the tip of my tongue, but it goes roughly paraphrasing: "The children shall be reproached for ungodly fathers, or the children shall complain of an ungodly father." Okay, this is the ancestors of the Edomites, so-called white man. Okay, and what they have done, okay, is so atrocious that now they have to pay for everything that they've done to the Israelites.
Right, that was taken out of the British Museum because within the manual it talked about how rape was a weapon of war that should be used against the indigenous population. You're ashamed of that now. You're ashamed.
By the way, fair use, fair use, fair use. Do not make money off this videos for educational purposes only.
Right? Who was Christopher Columbus?
A shameful spewing on their glory. Yeah.
His image has been so whitewashed, but he was trafficking little girls on an island.
He was a small hat. He was a J-O-O, okay? That's who Christopher Columbus, Cristobal Colon, that's his real name, okay? Let's go to Exodus 21:16. And he that stealeth a man and selleth him, or if he be found in his hand, he shall surely be put to death. Like he said, why was it that Jake was considered less than human? Because they claimed, these Edomites claimed to believe in the Bible, okay? And this is a law in the Bible. So if they traffic human beings, if they steal and sell and enslave human beings in the way that they did, which was unjust, okay? If they did that to other human beings, technically they would have to abide by the laws of the Bible and they would all be put to death. However, if it's not a human being, if it's not a full human being, okay, then they would be justified. That's why I got this. Okay, I typed in 3/5 of a human. 3/5 of a human refers to the 3/5 compromise in the U.S. Constitution. You see, Jake, that is all, patriotic, and they forget the history of these devils and exactly what they thought of you while they were forming this nation. They never had you in mind when they were talking about the Constitution and rights to all human beings and all that. They weren't talking about Jake. They had their other white European Edomites in mind when they were making these constitutions and these laws. Jake wasn't even a full human. It says a political deal counting 3 enslaved persons as 3/5 of a person, of a free person, for representation in Congress and taxation, significantly boosting Southern states' power, but reflecting the dehumanizing view of enslaved people as detailed. Okay, so it says a compromise during the 1787 Constitutional Convention between Northern and Southern states. Okay, Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution stipulated that for population counts census, all other persons enslaved would be counted as 3/5 of a free person. So they didn't even consider you to be a whole man, a whole woman, a whole human being. Okay, Proverbs 6:34, for jealousy is the rage of a man. Therefore, he will not spare in the day of vengeance. And what did the Lord say? The Lord said in Zechariah 1:14, so the angel that communed with me said unto me, cry thou, saying, thus saith the Lord Yahweh of hosts, I am jealous for Jerusalem and for Zion with great jealousy. Okay, so the Lord is jealous for Zion, and he said that jealousy is a rage of a man, and who has had us in captivity? The so-called white man, Esau, Edom. This is why the Lord is not going to spare any Edomites in the day of vengeance. They're all going to be destroyed if they're in Babylon the Great. Some of them will live through World War III. They're not going to receive salvation. Anybody that lives through World War III at the end of the destruction of Babylon the Great, if you're not an Israelite, you're going straight into slavery. You're not going up on a chariot. You're not entering into the new covenant. You're not going to get a new body. You're not going to be turned into an Alahayim. You're not going to be immortal, and you're going to have no authority or rulership in the kingdom of heaven, the tabernacle of David. It's going to be pure and utter domination and pure dictatorship with Yahushai at the head and 144,000 under him. And we're going to conquer and rule the world and the universe for all eternity. And all other races, all other nations of people will be our slaves eternally. Now, for the first 1,000 years, it's going to be hardcore bondage, just like we went through, but double. Okay, especially for you Edomites. Okay, but after 1,000 years, the Edomites will be completely and totally done away with and genocided off the planet. Every single one of them, not a drop of Edomite blood will be left living on the planet Earth. Okay, but the other nations, they're not going to be completely destroyed. They're going to be allowed to go back into their own lands and govern amongst themselves. However, they will still be our slaves. They will still be our servants, and they will absolutely 100% be forced to follow the laws, statutes, and commandments of the Bible. There will be no other gods. There will be no other religions. They will be worshiping Yahweh Ba'Hashim Yahweh Shai and serving the Israelites for all eternity. And that's it. That is what the gospel is. That's what the tabernacle of David is about. Okay? Let's finish this real quick.
Let me get this. Trafficking little girls on an island. Who does that sound like, huh?
Sounds like Epstein,
Right-wing defenders of Christopher
who is also a little hat. Okay?
Columbus and his legacy. He was trafficking 9-year-old indigenous girls on an island. Who does that remind you of, you intellectual coward? Just because liberals are dog shit doesn't mean that you shake hands with the devil.
Hey, he's right, man. So that brings out that history of the brutality of slavery. Let me get one more verse, Deuteronomy 30:7, because this is why the Edomites, they can't accept the truth. They can't tell the truth. The Christian church will never give you the truth, because this is what's going to happen. All the brutality that was explained in that man's little rant, okay, everything that he talked about, plus more is what's going to happen to our enemies. Deuteronomy 30:7. And the Lord Yahweh thy power will put all these curses upon thine enemies. So all the curses of not having control of your children, going into slavery on slave ships, being sold as slaves, having no power, right? All of that, all the curses upon thine enemies and on them which hate thee, which persecuted thee, which would be the primary ones would be you so-called white people, Esau, Edom, okay, you Edomites. All right. So with that, I'll close out and give all praise, glory, and honor to Yahweh Ba'Hashim Yahweh Shai, Ba'Hashim Rekakwadash. Shalom.